All right, let's say that you're a fisherman, that you're a medieval fisherman, and you wanted to build a net. You wanted to construct your fishing net, right? So you've got your big fishing net here. How big was your fishing net? Well, this fishing net should be big enough for you to hold on the short end. You want to be able to handle it. It should be long enough, to actually catch fish with it. So we're thinking about this fishing net. How am I going to build that? Well, I am actually going to build this 5 L's by, let's say, 20 fathoms. Okay. Um, fathoms are also a relative unit, but this L's, I'm going to talk about what is an L. You've never heard of an L, probably because you've never built your own fishing net, never woven your own fishing net. But if you are a fisherman and you want to build your own fishing net, then you had to build it 5 L's. Traditionally, it was 5 L's long. Right? And why would it be 5 L's long? Well, an L is this length. From your elbow, where it gets its name, elbow, to your forefinger. And it's a little bit different in different places and for different uses, because this is a completely relative measure, but in general, that's what an L was. And you'll notice this is your elbow. This is your forefinger. And why would that be? Because 5 L's is basically the span of your arms. Okay, you can easily measure. It's harder to measure a span. 5 L's is about the span of your arms. That's actually another. That's actually another measure, right? Let's see. There, called a span. The problem with using the span is you can't measure it while you're actually building the thing. You have to pull it all the way out and pull it back out. So this elbow, or this L, excuse me, which is based on your elbow to your forefinger, this was something that was useful while you were making your net. So this is more or less what we care about as far as measurement is concerned, is we want a standard by which to measure things. Now, when you're building nets for your own use, then the best measurement is completely relative, right? Relative to you, right? You want things to be the size that you are, right? So if you're short, you want smaller L's. If you're tall, you want bigger L's. Makes sense, right? Because the whole point of using this L as 5 L's wide is because what you care about is handling that net, right? And if that net is greater than 5 L's wide, you can't handle that net. So we use this relative measure, but it is a measure that everybody knows. All of the fishermen know you use an L, use 5 L's to make one net, which is also equal to a span. They also know that. So those are relative measures. That's good as long as all you care about is you, right? All we're going to care about is you. What happens if you have instead something where you're interacting with someone else? Now all of a sudden that doesn't work out. Now probably if somebody's buying a net from you, then it doesn't really matter too terribly much, right? If they don't care enough to make their own net, they probably just care that you make a good net. But what about something else that's really important, which would be, say, grain, right? So grain used to be sold in something called a bushel. A bushel's, sort of baskets. Well, it is a basket basically, but it's basket sized. And what you'd do with a bushel is you'd fill it with grain, and you'd sell it, right? People would buy and sell grain all over the place. Let's say you were in medieval Poland. You'd be going up and down rivers if you were a merchant, buying grain and selling it back in I don't know, Warsaw or something like that. So what would you do with your bushel? Well, you could buy it. Now, if along any particular river, all the bushels would be the same size. So I don't, I'm not a historian. I don't know things about geography. So, and my crap, this guy's not coming up. So you have this size bushel up and down one river, and up and down another river, you have another size bushel. Right? It's larger, let's say. I mean, they could easily be twice as large. A bushel going from what we now call like, no, I shouldn't say holding maybe 24 pounds of, let's say, wheat to 72 pounds of wheat. They had huge variations in their sizes, but they would always be the same up and down the same river. So you might have one river right here, and all along here there'd be towns that used the larger bushel. Then you'd have another river here, all along here there'd be towns that used the smaller bushel. And so in each one of these towns they'd have an ornate, usually metal, copper, something that was too expensive for the farmers to copy, and therefore, everyone in town would be sure when they were using the town bushel that nobody was cheating anybody else. Especially, they'd be sure that the merchant who was coming up and down the river to buy and sell wheat wouldn't be cheating them. So oftentimes this was the only real artwork in a town, right? Really strong artwork in the town was the bushel, because it was very important that nobody be able to copy it. And actually, there's some more to that. There have been historians that have gone through, right, these different towns, and they look at the different towns with the different size bushels. And they can actually see which towns are trading with this city, which towns are. Why does this sometimes work and sometimes not? Trading with this city, right? So you can see just from these patterns what's going on there. This isn't enough, though. This isn't enough to really explain exactly how weird this is. Because there were two different ways to measure. Well, there are at least two different ways to measure your bushels. You could have your struck bushel, and you could have your heaped bushel. And basically what was happening here is when the merchant was going up and down the river, he would always buy heaped bushels, right? And when he was in town, he would always use the struck bushels. And then you'd have this region here. This green region here is called his profit. This is how he actually made money, right? Because in the medieval church, you weren't really allowed to make any money. You were supposed to sell for as much as you bought for, and otherwise it was sort of sinful, which is sort of impossible because you have to go up and down the river, eat things, and bring all this stuff down over here. It doesn't actually work. So the way they got around, medieval usury laws and things like that, was to sell this struck bushel for the same price as they bought the heaped bushel from. But that means they got several extra bushels. And this isn't all, right? There were additionally huge issues about how to actually strike the bushel. You take your striking rod, how would you strike it, right? To make it flat. Did you have to fill everything back in if there was a little gap over here? What did it mean for this to be heaped? Did you just dump it in and whatever happened, or did you just keep on going until things started falling on the floor? And these were real arguments that people had because it meant, money. So, so these are standard sized bushels. Their standards are different for each trading route, but they have to be standard because people are dealing with each other. And for people to trust each other enough to actually do business with each other, there had to be these standards. Right? And that's why, one of the few things that's actually in the Constitution that the government has to do is to create a system of weights and measures. Okay, so those are why we care about all these standards, all these measurements. We decide how to standardize units and measurements. We do that. That is for us. These things don't come down to us from God. They are not universal. When we sent out satellites into the into space, we did not send out sizes based on inches or meters. Meters maybe what we use in physics, in science, the SI units, but the SI units are just as arbitrary as any other unit. They are completely meaningless, except for you and I trusting each other in our interactions with each other. They're just a unit. They're just a way for us to trust each other, which is very important because if we don't trust each other, then we don't have exchange, right? And then we have to do all exchange through a command economy, and life is bad for all of us. For any particular dimension, we have many different units. Remember, we had the L, we had a span, right, the elbow we had a span, which was like this, from so forth and so on. So those are both different standards of units for the dimension of length. Those are both lengths. Some other interesting ones would be like bow shot. In medieval England, everybody was supposed to be an archer, just in case they were invaded. And so they would draw up deeds based on the size called a bow shot. And the size of a bow shot was however far you could shoot your bow. So these are all relative. Here's another initially relative one. It was called an inch. And an inch is about this size. This is supposed to be a thumb. And from the tip of your thumb to, that first knuckle there, that's 1 inch, right? This is your rule of thumb. Don't let anybody tell you the rule of thumb is anything else. It is not based on anything except, carpentry. Okay, it's just a way for you to figure out how big something is, right? When you're trying to make something. So this is basically what an inch was up until the point that they started standardizing things. When they started standardizing things, it became something different. So let's look at a couple of things we're used to. Whoops. Right? One is the inch. So we said, you can try this at home. Won't work because it's a different kind of barley probably that you buy at the store. You can look at this as your inch, right? But the original or the first, not original. So this is your original definition of an inch, the thumb. But they also had another definition. The English had, when they needed to standardize, when everybody had to be using the same inches, they used the length of 3 grains of good ripe barley picked from the middle of the ear and laid end to end. Sort of like this. Right? So you can try this. You can go to the store and pick up some barley and see if it works. But they're not actually the same kinds of barley, right? So you'd have to get the right kind of English barley to do that, rather than the different kinds of barley we have available. There are several varieties of barley available. I have no idea which kind is actually in the stuff that I buy at Kroger. Tastes good, but I have no idea what's in it. And since the only thing that Britons really like is beer, they also figured out they also define the pound basically in terms of barley. And 1 pound is 7,000 grains of barley. So you put 7,000 little grains of barley together, and that's 1 pound. 7,000 grains. A grain is actually also a measure of mass in the imperial units, and it's 1 grain of barley. So, and you can figure out the number for an ounce and all that other stuff if you like. You've got the time, right? So that's what we care about, is in order for us to do science, to do commerce, we have to have standards. We'll talk about the SI units later. The reason why we use SI units is because for commerce, we just need a set of units that everybody agrees on. For science, we actually need something a little bit better, right? And so when we talk about the SI units, maybe we'll talk about that a little bit. We'll talk about how they are found and stuff like that. But this is the main deal, right? This is why we have standards. Originally, everything was relative. So the rule of thumb is a relative measure for your inch. And, pull out your ruler, check, it's an inch. And then you can come over here and you can look at this rule of Barley, and that is a standard measure for the inch. So it's no longer a relative measurement, it's a standard measurement that everybody should be able to agree on. And then finally, we'll have a more scientific approach when we get to the meter, although we'll see the meter hasn't always been that scientific. No matter its, revolutionary roots. So that seems good enough for now. We will talk a little bit more later about conversion, and we'll do a couple more things, and hopefully that'll be enough to keep you happy on yeah, hopefully that'll be enough to keep you happy. Then we'll come over and do more stuff, starting with some kinematics next time. All right, bye now.